All right, hello, welcome everyone to Weird West Radio on Rainman Digital. Rainman Digital's exclusive Western show where we discuss pretty much all things Western. And today we will be breaking down Horizon, an American Saga, Chapter 1. It has a running time of 181 minutes and has a reported budget of $100 million. Now that is covering both Chapters 1 and 2. Horizon, an American Saga, is a film series that consists of 4 planned American epic westerns directed, co-written, and produced by, as well as starring, Kevin Costner from a script he co-wrote with John Baird and based on an original story co-authored by Costner himself. The plot centers on fictional characters and takes place in pre- and post-Civil War America and details the exploration of the American West. Depicting a 12-year span, the movies feature an ensemble cast portraying various characters and their experiences pioneering into new territory from their homes. So, David, you're here with me today, and we have a very large piece of work to break down, analyze, discuss, review. Kevin Costner's Horizon is a film that works within the legacy of the classic Western by blending the timeless elements of directors like Ford and Hawks with the modern complexities of revisionist cinema. And this really is where the film excels. It excels within the legacy of the Western form itself.
Yes.
In Horizon, Costner intertwines the myth of manifest destiny with a layered narrative that reflects both the grandeur and the moral ambiguities of frontier life, things that we have discussed time and time again. Horizon also pays homage to the Western genre through high-quality production and epic landscapes, while pushing it into new, thought-provoking territory that unpacks its rich connections to American cultural identity and an enduring cinematic legacy. It's also a film that utilizes the Western's generic conventions in old and new ways. In large part, it engages with the so-called Fordian themes as analyzed by Peter Wolin and Levi Strauss. By incorporating these themes, Horizon ends up reflecting both the traditional narrative patterns and contemporary revisions of the genre. Themes such as the struggle between law and chaos, the heroic journey, and the mythical portrayal of the frontier are all central to its narrative structure, which adheres to and subverts established genre conventions. And ultimately, this interplay between traditional and modern elements helps to both honor the classic Western, which is definitely something I appreciate, while also embracing, which I also appreciate, the modernist or postmodernist leanings, such as self-reflexivity and pastiche, which highlights the genre's enduring relevance and adaptability. Keyword, adaptability. That's why the Western, America's oldest genre, is still relevant today because of its adaptability and filmmakers like Costner who are able to work within its cinematic legacy to keep it relevant and speak to contemporary audiences. And being distributed through Warner Brothers Pictures, it actually joins a stable of Western classics like Dodge City, The Searchers, Rio Bravo, and then smaller films like Virginia City and They Died with Their Boots On, just to name a few. So needless to say, this film is a smorgasbord of film geek wants, especially if you're a Western fan. David, what were your initial thoughts on the film?
My initial thoughts on the film was actually I was really surprised and kind of really pleasantly pleased with the fact that in the first chapter of Horizon, we finally get to see one of the things that I've always been wondering is why is Kevin Costner, what's the whole point? Why did he decide to actually do this? Because me and you have talked about in past news about Horizon, how like everyone in the industry was looking at Kevin Costner and saying, why are you leaving Yellowstone to do this? Why? There has to be a reason why you're doing this. And after you watch Horizon, the first chapter essentially of his epic saga. I fully understand that what Costner was trying to do was bring back kind of like that old classic movies that we remember as moviegoers. You know, you bring up names like Ford and the classic westerns of the day and Warner Brothers. But if the one thing that everyone said is those type of westerns wouldn't work in today's world.
Mm-mm.
Kevin Costner has set out to try to prove everyone wrong and say, no, those westerns can work. And not only that, I can do what I did with Yellowstone and contemporize a lot of like my ideas for that genre. And these essentially he was hoping that, I think, Horizon was going to open the doors, the floodgates essentially, for more westerns in today's films.
Mm-hmm.
Because westerns in general it's a dying genre
Because of its own ideological trappings.
Yeah.
It being the first true American genre, or even I believe first true film genre. Forget American, but I believe the Western is the first film genre, and it has dated generic aspects that don't always work with modern audiences. In large part, people believe that those earlier Westerns were a part of this need to create a national identity at that time.
Yeah.
So that's what these Westerns helped do. It helped create an American identity. It was all built on myth, but that's not the point. National identities are created in various ways. Some people purposely create fake history. I believe the Finnish created fake stories in order to create nationalistic allegiances. So every country, every nation, they've all done certain things. Whereas with the film, I don't think there was ever, when it comes to the Western film, I don't think there was ever like malicious intent. It's just a matter of perspective and the people who were working within this form of film at this time. And I like that you bring up, the question of why would he do something like this? Two films that cost $100 million, and yes, $50 million a piece isn't a whole lot of money in this contemporary Hollywood film environment when you're talking about budgets of $200 million plus, but still $50 million for a Western this size.
Exactly.
First off, that's quite the accomplishment that Costner was able to make such a large Western for actually a little bit of money. $50 million isn't a lot for what that first fucking chapter gave us. But why did he choose to do that? And I think it was a little bit of both, like what you were saying, Dave. I think he wanted to show that certain types of or certain aspects of the older Westerns can in fact work if you mesh it within the revisionist form as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like when you take a look at like overall what the story was, Costner's goal was to actually, I think, try to tap in to I don't want to use the term younger audience, but like he wanted to tap into that audience that brought the success of, say, Yellowstone, where you have everyone. It didn't matter if it was an older Western audience, didn't matter if it was a younger Western audience. He captured mass audience exposure with Yellowstone.
Yeah.
And he was looking at it going, well, why can't the Western genre do this?
I think he was trying to parlay the recent fame. Well, Costner's always been famous, but the recent, his newfound fame via Paramount's Yellowstone. I think he was trying to parlay that into creating a successful box office film that harkens back to the very genre that started his career in many ways.
Yeah. And when you think about it, I know that basically people have brought up the fact that the problem with Horizon is it's a slow burn. It's a very slow film. But I'm not going, but that's because of look who the filmmaker is. He's a classic filmmaker who makes classic style movies, and classic Westerns are slow. They're slow burns.
Yeah. Maybe not slow burn, although I mean, I wouldn't disagree with your thoughts, but maybe not a slow burn. I feel like this is a movie that you really have to watch. And I know that
Yes.
sounds really silly, but you got to remember that movies are visual. That's yes, they incorporate various other aspects of our senses, obviously, but the majority of film, I'd say, is based on the visuals. But looking at this from a perspective of a Western scholar or an individual who studies the Westerns like ourselves, I feel like this is a movie that is 100% visual. You
Yes.
have to watch. There is an exposition, like through dialogue, that expresses what's happening. You have to watch each scene. There are moments where there is no dialogue, but if you look down at your phone or you look away and you get distracted for a few moments, you're going to miss key visual cues.
Yes.
That tells you what's happening. It helps you with the pacing. It helps you understand the flow of time as it's captured in this narrative. So this movie is visual. So some people may say it's slow, and I would agree with that. Although I would change the wording a bit and just say it's visual. It's a visual picture
film
that you have to follow, and if you don't follow it concisely, you're going to get lost because it does move fast at times, which is an odd thing to say when I'm also agreeing that it could be described as slow. And what I mean by that is just the pace that the narrative moves chronologically.
And also when you throw into the fact that basically today's audiences are far different from, say, the audiences of film 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And
very different.
I remember seeing Horizon and actually talking to someone after the viewing of it. And I basically, came to the same conclusion. It's a good film, and it would be excellent. It would be an excellent film that's received better, say, 10 years ago. Because the audience right now who controls, mass audience favor, that demographic.
The younger demo, yeah.
Younger demo, they're not prepared for like a film where you have to sit down and you have to watch it like a classic film.
And it's not about low art, high art. It's not about that. It's simply about the viewer habits of today.
Yeah, that's it.
The younger generation has been groomed and brought up in a very fast, quick pace
TikTok.
That's what I was going to say, of produced TikTok videos, Instagram reels. We're talking about 2-3 minutes of content at times. And that's what a lot of these younger people are now used to viewing. So if you ask, an 18-year-old or even a 20-year-old, and I don't want to be an essentialist here, but generally speaking, a movie like this probably isn't going to connect with them.
Yeah.
Or they're just going to find it boring because they're not used to having to watch things in this way.
Yeah, because like the Horizon is not made to be like made like a lot of movies nowadays where you can cut segments out of the film and put it in little tiny segments, say in trailer form or in scene form on YouTube, like our 5 to 10 minute increments.
Yeah.
And have the audience watch those and get a sense of that film. Horizon is not like that. You have to watch the film in its entirety to actually really look at it critically and analyze it. And I think that basically audiences nowadays aren't built like that.
Yeah,
because you look at like what the big films are nowadays. The Marvel films just came out. They had a huge box office. Well, that's because audiences go there and just want to consume and ingest very quick tidbits.
Yeah, and I understand that. It's all about taste, really. I'm not saying one is better than the other. Now, for me personally, yes, one is better than the other.
Yeah.
But again, that's my own opinion. Now, David, some of the other complaints that were pushed forward about this movie had to do with the fact that a lot of people didn't feel like they were watching a movie. They felt like they were watching episodes of television. And these are comments coming from, mind you, air quotes, real critics. And it just made me so saddened.
Yeah.
Because I realized that these modern critics, David, and I may sound like an elitist, and I really don't care.
Yeah, exactly.
These modern critics, David, they don't understand film. They don't. Now, this is what I posted on my social media feeds. I ended up deleting it because I didn't want to sound too much like an elitist when there's no context. But I will read it, okay? So, not sure what the mainstream critics were watching. This is a true Western film. Some of the biggest complaints from critics are that it feels like a television series. To someone who doesn't fully grasp film history or understand what film form is, such a statement might be made. Horizon employs an episodic film narrative, where the story is broken into distinct segments or episodes. Typically, this structure allows for a variety of stories or scenarios to be explored within the same film, all generally connected through a central theme. And then I finish by saying, not to sound elitist, but we seem to have a generation of critics who lack a general understanding of film and its history reviewing films.
Yeah, because like ultimately, when I hear that criticism nowadays, oh, it's written like a TV show, I'm like going, well, what about movies that, you know, like are in geek culture, like in Star Wars? To hold that as a negative in a film is very illogical.
Yeah.
Because that's not a good reason why a film is bad.
I feel like some people are misunderstanding like what this type of movie really is doing. In a movie like this, there are no lead characters.
Yeah.
And in that regard, I can see why someone who might not be schooled in complete film theory would say such a thing, as I said. But when you understand that not all films are written or revolve around a singular protagonist, in large part, this film's main character is the theme of the movie itself.
Yes.
And the characters are simply supporting cast members for the protagonist, which is the theme, which is Horizon, the metaphor. That's the character. That's the driving force behind this entire movie.
Yeah.
And that has been lost on so many critics. They don't even understand what they're watching. So let's go through this. I want to address the pros and the cons, but I want to start with the pros. So as far as production goes, the film's high-quality production, attention to detail, and epic sweeping landscapes speak to Costner's experience as a filmmaker. Although not a perfect film, I do want to preface that, with a few odd choices towards the end, it is a well-constructed film that feels like it would have performed better, as you were saying, David, with audiences a decade or possibly two earlier.
Yeah.
One aspect of its formal elements that work for an expansive story like this is what we were just talking about, is Costner's decision to utilize an episodic style narrative, meaning the story is broken into those distinctive segments and loosely connected, mostly through thematic means. And by doing that, you're able to focus on different characters and events. You can allow the pacing or the chronological aspects that move linearly to move forward at a relatively quick pace within the same overarching context. So this allows for a variety of characters and their stories to be explored, but they are not necessarily told in parallel. And this is something that I was keeping an eye on leading into the film, you know, because one of the problems I do have with some of Costner's work, and also historical epics in general, are the pacing issues, where you start at one point in time, and by the end of the movie, 25 years has passed.
Yes.
I'm not a big fan of those types of movies for obvious reasons. I think there's a lot of nuance that just is breezed right past. And that's what I was hoping we weren't going to get going into this movie. And sure enough, what we get is actually a Western epic and not a historical epic.
Because like the one thing that I think Costner as a filmmaker and as a writer, in his storytelling, he loves basically flash forwarding. I mean, the fact of the matter is, at the beginning,
you mean moving fast?
Moving fast.
Yeah.
He wants to move fast. He wants to show that basically time moves and everyone adapts over seconds, right? Because it's a movie. And sure enough, automatically when I saw Horizon, the first thing I saw was like the first 30 minutes, you go from 1859 to all of a sudden
It's
I
4
think
years
it was
later.
4 years
yeah.
later.
Yeah.
And I was like going, okay.
But
yep, that's a Costnerism.
Yeah, and I was afraid that was going to happen, but fortunately, it actually works well for the most part in this movie. It does. As I said, there are aspects towards the end that I was a little disappointed in, not with the story and how it developed, but with those problems that can happen, that can surface when you skip time.
Yeah.
For the most part, the first 2.5 hours, I don't feel like there's a lot of problems with the movie. The last 30 minutes, and this may have to do with the fact that he was starting to set up for the second installment, there are new faces that just pop into the movie. There's a specific scene between a prostitute that had a relationship with Costner for a while in this first chapter, and suddenly she's connected to this other gentleman who's trying to use her to manipulate things. And I had to rewind the movie 45 minutes because I wasn't sure if I missed something. Like, what's this plan that this girl had? You feel like there's a strategy to take advantage of Costner's character, and that was never set up. So there are things like that you are introduced to towards the end of the movie, and I feel like those problems have everything to do with the fact that he was also trying to set up for the second chapter, because one of the complaints as well about this movie is it doesn't feel like a standalone film, and they would be right because this was never intended to be a standalone film, and that's why I don't view that as a negative. With a movie like Horizons, it was built into the initial concept and premise to be a multi-saga installment. Yes. So I don't have problems with them setting up for that second movie and this film not feeling like a standalone picture. I just have issues with how they started to set up for that second picture without taking into account that there's going to be some confusion there.
Yes. And that does fall on Costner as the writer and the creator. And yeah, doing that, only for me, that works in television. Because, you set up things at the end of the season.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, bang, you end on a cliffhanger. And I understand that basically that's how he wrote it, because in a lot of ways, what we're seeing is Costner adapting as a filmmaker and a writer. Because if you think about it, if this was actually a series that was drawn out like Yellowstone, I honestly think people would be thinking this is like the greatest thing ever.
Yeah, well, because maybe it would have played better if it was broken into like broken up and set up as a limited series.
As a limited series, I honestly think that people would actually gravitate to it more, because that's how people are adapted to viewing nowadays. Costner, unfortunately, is kind of late to the party. He's like going, okay, if this works for me here, this should work over here. Not necessarily.
I think he also wanted the prestige of a theatrical release, because in this day and age, you hear this from a lot of old school directors who have worked throughout the 80s, 90s, 70s, and now they're still working into the 21st century. And a lot of them have discussed their disillusionment with Hollywood and cinema at large, not in terms of content, but just, or I should say, not in terms of the types of films we're getting, but more or less about how the films that they work on now are not looked at as film.
Yeah.
They are looked at as content. And because of that, there are directors like Scorsese and Tarantino who have actively voiced their opinion on this, saying that they don't want their movies to be viewed as simply content. They want them to be viewed as cultural phenomenon. That's what they are.
Yes. And that's what that's the biggest thing right there that I think that Costner was aiming for. A film that is that has cultural impact.
Yes.
And unfortunately, the film going audience nowadays is not built for that. And
Unfortunately, it's very sad. But
it's sad, but it's also, for filmmakers, it's also about adapting. And I think that basically
that's fair.
that it's kind of like a two-way street at that point. Is if you, the way to be cultural impactful nowadays, streaming services. Unfortunately, that's the way. If you look at like what really hits a cultural impact of the audience nowadays, you have to look at like series like let's say Breaking Bad. Breaking Bad is really strong because of the streaming audience.
Yeah, because of its Netflix bump.
Because of the Netflix bump.
Yeah.
And like films like Horizon 20 years ago, I think 20 years ago, the person that I viewed it with afterwards said, well, maybe 10 years, but I feel 20 years ago, you'd be talking about this film as an Oscar winner.
Yeah.
And everybody would be talking about it.
It's funny you say that, Dave, because that's the first thing that came to mind when I was watching this movie, just based on the opening hour and how beautifully framed and just put together that opening hour was. I believe I sent you the message. I said that. I'm like, this dude is like, I don't know what people are talking about. I don't know how this movie is sitting so low on Rotten Tomatoes, because I'm watching this movie and I see something that could easily be an Oscar-nominated picture.
Well, yeah, you cannot tell me that basically cinematography of this film needs to be analyzed for critical value.
Yes.
In the regards of like an Oscar whether nomination at the very minimum.
Yeah.
Because what Horizon, what he was able to actually pull off is a visual that we have not seen in the last decade. We haven't seen something like no one wants to tackle a Ford type of look.
Yeah.
Because number one, it's expensive and it's much harder than a lot of people think.
I think the Western that would probably, when I say Western, let's say, because there's been a lot, but let's say a bigger budget A-list Western film that works in similar territories, but tries to distance itself from the Fordian Westerns of the early classic Hollywood era, is the film starring Christian Bale, Hostiles.
But even then, with Hostiles, he still made it kind of like,
it was more revisionist. It more leaned into the revisionist aspects of Westerns.
And it was more intimate in a lot of ways. It wasn't epic.
Right.
It wasn't like 1950s Ford, you have those scoping views of the landscape.
Beautiful shots, yeah.
And you have like essentially a love letter to Americana. You don't see that.
Yeah.
In Horizon, that was the first time when I saw when I first saw the first 30 minutes, I'm like going, holy crap, it's impressive that he makes the visuals of Manifest Destiny look cool again.
You're right. But this does bleed now into our more theory-heavy portion of our discussion. A lot of meaning can be gleaned simply from the title alone. Horizon, which symbolically represents the goal or drive of what you just mentioned, Manifest Destiny. It serves as a metaphor for the forthcoming frontier town. This setting is used to unravel both the mythological and ideological aspects of early Westerns, the things we've been talking about, that some theorists believe aided in the formation of national identity, as well as the very real impetus for westward expansion. So, looking at this movie, at the heart of Horizon lies the thematic exploration of Manifest Destiny and westward expansion, which have long been central to the Western genre. But what is Manifest Destiny, Dave? What is it? It was the 19th century doctrine that justified American expansion across the continent and is often depicted in Westerns as a driving force behind the taming of the frontier. In Horizon, specifically, Costner intertwines this ideology with a modern sensibility. So it acknowledges both the romanticized vision of American exceptionalism and the darker, more complex realities of frontier settlement. Ultimately, what it does then is it captures the tension between civilization and wilderness, a key element in Westerns, and reflects on the moral ambiguities that arise from the conquest of new territories.
And that's the thing. That's the thing I really liked about Horizon 2. They were able, Kevin Costner was to show the glory of Manifest Destiny, which the way that he was able to do it was like he showed the bonuses of Manifest Destiny and kind of say, the problem with Manifest Destiny isn't Manifest Destiny itself. It's the people who implement it. It's the human. You could take this great thing, a great idea, this great concept of Manifest Destiny, but unfortunately you cannot predict what human nature will do.
Right. The idea of traveling west, yes, is a romanticized idea, finding a piece of literally the American dream. That's really what pushed it forward, even back then.
Build your future.
Yes. Unfortunately, because this Manifest Destiny was also intertwined with a lot of Protestant religious doctrine as well, because of that, it did also fuel a type of, I don't want to say racism, superiority, meaning this is our right.
Yes.
This is our God-given right to colonize the West. So what about the indigenous people who lived there prior? What about their Manifest Destiny? So that's why using it in a movie like this, which definitely deals with the confrontation between white colonists and the Native American tribes, now you can see how he's taking those aspects of Manifest Destiny. Kevin Costner's taking those aspects from the Fortean themes, which were not critical in its use. It was simply, hey, Manifest Destiny, this is what was, how it was utilized, yay for westward expansion. But he's taking those cues and using it to create a critical lens.
Yes.
That's why he's able to take those aspects, stay true to those Westerns, but also not keep those rose-colored glasses on at the same time.
Yeah, because he's able to actually not just brought forth essentially one thesis, which is his Manifest Destiny, but also bring in the idea of human nature. Yeah. Human nature will always be unpredictable. You don't know what a human's going to possibly do. You can hope, and that's what Manifest Destiny is. It's hope. Manifest Destiny is
optimism.
Hope.
Yeah.
It's optimism.
Mm-hmm.
Human nature is just brutal and basically
it's unpredictable.
Where it's like you don't know. There is no optimism with human nature.
Yeah,
because humans will act instinctively.
Well, that also goes into those other Western theories about wilderness and civilization.
The
dichotomy between the two.
And that's what I liked about the also was actually you see, maybe it's because I love breaking down films and I love seeing like little things here and there and puzzling out like, oh, this is what the filmmaker is saying. But with Horizon, I saw so many elements where I'm like going, oh, he's tackling Manifest Destiny versus human nature. He's also tackling about the idea of the wild versus the establishment.
Mm-hmm.
And he's dealing with, you know, he's almost dancing with this. And normally when you see filmmakers nowadays tackle stuff like this, they clumsily clomp around these issues
because they're not quite sure what space they're working in.
Exactly. Costner, though,
he
knows what he's doing.
Dude, that's one thing that has given me so much more like respect for Costner. I've always loved Costner, so let me just say that. I've always been a huge fan of Costner. I even enjoy his truly shitty films like
Postman.
Hey, come on, simmer down with Postman. I don't know if I'd call that shitty.
I like Postman. I like Postman.
What's the one? Waterworld.
Waterworld.
Like, and then there's smaller films like Mr. Brooks, which is awesome. So he knows what he's doing and he understands film. But when you think of Kevin Costner, you don't think of an auteurist. Oftentimes, you think of a guy who's a decent actor, who's proven himself within the Western genre, who has proven himself as an actor a top tier A-list talent, but I don't really look at him as someone like a Scorsese or a Tarantino, or someone who really understands film history, or someone like even Nolan, who also understands film history. Whereas when you watch this movie, you're watching someone who understands nearly every aspect of the Western film.
Yeah. You're seeing essentially a Western auteur.
Yes.
Like,
yeah.
when it comes to Kevin Costner, when you look historically at Costner's body of work, all of his films have that Western twang to it. And that's just a part of who he is. And that's a part of like who he is as a filmmaker. And I used to actually look at it and kind of give it the side eye and go, oh, okay, he's not as good as, just like what you say, a Scorsese or a Tarantino. But after Horizon, I was like going, no, he actually deserves to be in that echelon, much like how like Ron Howard.
He doesn't get enough credit.
He doesn't get enough credit, but honestly, Ron Howard's a genius as a filmmaker, and Costner belongs in that echelon.
It makes you wonder, maybe he's always had this skill set, but because he is a product of the film system, the conveyor belt Hollywood system,
yes,
he's never had the opportunity to express himself so freely.
Oh yeah, because
this is an indie film. For all intents and purposes, this is a film fully financed by himself, where he doesn't have that type of oversight. So if this is the type of movie we get when Costner has no studio oversight, then can we get more of these pictures? Because this is a guy who actually understands film.
Yeah. And that's the thing that's one of the things that I find really disappointing is like, when you look at Costner Horizon, I actually see its a lack of success as basically a statement on the film industry in whole. Is like
as a whole,
because essentially an indie film cannot survive in this environment. It just won't now.
Unless it's incredibly lucky.
It has to be incredibly lucky, and most likely it has to be a foreign film.
Which it happens probably once or twice every 2 or 3 years, which is not a lot.
I mean, that's the sad part when you actually look at the production of Horizon is not a big budget film. It is a small budget film. It belongs in the realm of indie film, honestly, because it's not financed by a big studio. It's financed by Kevin Costner himself. It's essentially, like if you were to take any other indie filmmaker out there and say, you go make a film with your own money. And that's essentially what it is.
Yeah.
And I think that there's not a lot of films like these nowadays. I can't even think of like films the last 2 years that have been like this, unless it's either a horror film.
Yeah.
Because horror films are cheap, and those usually get people's attention because, oh, this is unique. Here, it's sad because like this should be considered unique because no one's seen a Western in a long time. But the problem is the knock on Westerns, the that people have given it is basically, oh, it's a dated genre. It's like seeing a musical nowadays.
Well, yes, you're absolutely right. That's what I was about to say next, is that I just think a lot of people, especially, you and I being involved in various film circles, we hear these conversations with younger filmmakers who just don't understand Western, not because they don't have the intellectual capability. It's just because they're from a different time. So a movie like Horizon, when you're looking at the Rotten Tomato score, which is just grossly inaccurate in almost every way, it might struggle to resonate within the current socio-political moment due to the complex and even often contentious nature of the Western genre itself.
Yes.
It just doesn't align with a lot of people's ideological views of today. And even though a movie like this, I would say, doesn't ideologically align to a lost, dated idea by any means, however, for the casual viewer, they may think, oh, Western, Kevin Costner, old aging white man, Western film, I don't have any interest in seeing any of that nonsense. And they don't bother to watch a film that actually, brings all the greatest aspects of the classic Western and appropriately, and appropriately brings them all together with the revisionist form, as well as key aspects of film theory that a lot of people don't pay attention to in today's movie environment. If this was the 1960s and the 1970s, you would have people at coffee shops talking about these types of movies from a theoretical perspective. We're just not in that mindset any longer when it comes to film, and I do think that's part of the reason why the movie hasn't resonated with larger audiences. I mean, also, just to be very blunt, movies just don't work in theaters as much as they used to.
They don't. And that's the ultimate thing that's kind of sad about the entire situation that Horizon finds itself in, is like, I honestly think if Horizon could have found a way to release to the audience that basically was ready for it,
yeah,
I think it would have been received better. I looked at the Rotten Tomato score just recently, and I'm like going, it is no way that score.
Yeah.
And like, what makes me even more surprised is like critics are looking at it and giving some scores like this. And I'm like going, are you guys not really watching the film? Are you just looking at for superficial value? And then, as I alluded to earlier, you get movies like Deadpool Wolverine or the Marvel films, and you begin to realize audiences nowadays just care for the superficial. They want that quick, hit of excitement. It goes to like one of the criticisms I heard is like, oh, Kevin Costner doesn't show up till about like 40 minutes into the film.
It's more like an hour.
Yeah, and I'm like going, and the movie's not about his character.
Yeah.
The movie's called Horizon. It's about the idea. Are you not seeing that? No, I want to see Kevin Costner because he's on the poster, Mike.
Yeah.
He's on the poster looking all badass. And I'm like going,
he's in it, and he has great shooting scenes. If you want the action,
shooting scenes.
Don't think this is like another executive decision where you think you're going to watch, Kurt Russell and Steven Seagal team up, and Seagal dies in 5 minutes.
Yeah. This isn't going to be, like a Western like that. And that's the thing that's really sad about the whole thing is like, I honestly think that audiences nowadays, and I know you don't want to sound elitist, but nowadays I don't care. I like to tell people how it is, and a lot of people don't like to hear what I have to say about films nowadays, but it's the honest to truth. Unless someone comes out and proves to me with logical reasoning, that's the problem, Mike. You bring up all these issues that a lot of people have with Horizon. The criticism is not logical.
So we're going to go to a quick break, and then when we get back, we're going to break down the rest of Horizon. All right, welcome back, everyone, to Weird West Radio. If you are a new listener to our show, you can find all of our shows, past, present, and in the future, wherever you listen to podcasts. Just search Weird West Radio. Be sure to give us a thumbs up on YouTube if you found us there, and also give us a ratings and give us a 5-star rating and a positive review, please, on iTunes, as that does help our show get seen by more people. All right, David, so we're in the midst of some very deep theory when it comes to Horizon, and we had just got done talking about the meaning that you can glean from the title alone, Horizon.
Yes.
But also Horizon draws upon the mythic elements of the Western, as analyzed by film theorists like Andre Bazin and Richard Slotkin. For example, Bazin saw the Western as a genre that balances myth and realism, portraying the frontier as a space where American ideals are tested and affirmed, and then people like Slotkin and his concept of regeneration through violence, which there's an entire book series on that.
Oh, yeah.
I would highly recommend it. It is fascinating. he highlights the Western's role in depicting the violent conquest of the frontier as a necessary means of establishing order. And Costner's film echoes these themes, presenting the frontier not just as a physical space, but a symbolic battleground for the soul of the nation.
No, not just the nation, but also humanity. That's the thing that really, I think, Horizon takes it even further. It's not, everyone thinks that it's about the American dream. No, it's further than that. It's basically about humanity. It's about, like, you know,
It is about the American dream, but it goes beyond that. It transcends the American dream, and it shows you what people in general all vie for, right? Is that what you're saying? Like a perspective on life,
a perspective
and
on
advancement.
Life, and it's so difficult because you don't see films like this anymore. People, unfortunately, nowadays look at things less in depth and more superficially. So they'll only glean the
obvious
cliff notes.
Right.
Everyone jumps to the cliff notes of something.
Mm-hmm.
But when you actually dive deeper into something like this, you get a deeper meaning. Then those cliff notes change utterly.
It's not about, this is almost an argument versus structuralism versus post-structuralism in terms of film theory. So, for example, okay, so the overt, let's say, messaging, people may say, oh, it's about the American dream, striving for the American dream, and then using a lens to critique it. But it goes beyond that. That's what you're saying. You're saying that it's about why this American dream even exists. Like, how does the American dream become the dream for so many people?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what this movie really does. It dissects the root cause behind migratory patterns and the reasons why people wish to or did wish to advance west.
And that's the thing, is kind of like when you're dealing with, especially when you go into like the ideas of Baizen and other theorists that have tackled this, there's so much to glean off of there. And that's why it's like, I honestly feel like doing this show, Horizon is one of the most important films, I think, for a lot of film. I use this term lightly, film nerds out there.
Mm-hmm.
Horizon is a true experience for film enthusiasts, because this is a movie we haven't seen done in decades, because this harkens back to kind of like the times of 1940s and 1950s. A film like this, the more I think about it, Mike, and the more I have actually gone back and I've looked at scenes online and I've studied Horizon, there hasn't been a film, I think, in my past 5 years that I can point to and say, this feels like classic film storytelling. And that's the reason why, you know, earlier we were talking about the reasons why Horizon was less received and received well. And I think it's because the audience, the mass audience today, is not trained to view a movie like this.
The viewership, the audience themselves have changed. So that's not a negative per se, but that does mean that certain films are not going to work as well.
As attended. Because think about it. I mean, one of Bison's tenets, and I was looking it up here about cinema, is about realism, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
People want escapism. The one thing I've always heard people always say is like, I don't want to be sitting in a film and be bombarded with the reality of the world, right? However, now I say that because that is one of the main criticisms of Horizon, is because people who say that, not even a year ago, we applauded a film like Oppenheimer. Here in Horizon, I think the problem with Horizon is the fact that the subject matter that Horizon tries to tackle is so taboo to today's generation of film viewers that I think that basically people automatically stamp it with that stigma that no, I don't want to watch something like this.
Yes, the negative connotations of the successful Western with the white lead and the idea of taming the West has fallen out of favor with a lot of people. Now, when you watch a movie like this, David, I feel like it walks the line between escapist fare as well as intellectual fare. There's a lot going on. I feel like people can watch this movie and enjoy it for however they want to enjoy it, as just simply a 3-hour adventure into the Old West. But just to backtrack just a bit to align this thought with what you were saying a few moments ago as well. So when you watch a movie like this, you may have that knee-jerk reaction. Certain people, progressives, let's say, which we know a lot of the critics today tend to lean into the progressive spectrum of politics, and that's probably the reason why this film has not been, in my opinion, rated fairly. But looking at this movie objectively, it doesn't just lay down the typical framework for the American dream or manifest destiny. There's things that are being said. You have the idea of colonial and revolutionary origins. In fact, one of the characters, the general of the military camp, literally talks about why they came here in the first place. And tries to explain it to our lead character why certain things are going to happen and why there's nothing we can do to prevent people from settling. This brochure here, this horizon here, this represents the reason why we all came here in the first place. So there's a dissection. It isn't a justification. It's a dissection to understand and uncover what led the charge for this American dream, this manifest destiny. You have the issues of economic opportunity and capitalism, cultural and social ideals, immigration and the promise of a better life, political ideals and democracy. But you also have the other side of that coin, David, which they do not neglect, and that's the idea of displacement and land seizure. Manifest destiny, the expansionist ideology of manifest destiny, which was fueled by the pursuit of the American dream. It literally in this film shows what happens to the indigenous and how they are displaced. And the real problem at the center of the movie for the indigenous is that it's not even about land. It's not even about, hey, you're on our land, you shouldn't be here. It's about causing the displacement of food sources and resources. That's what caused the problem, because the white settlers come in and suddenly they have nowhere to hunt and find food. So they're forced to go into the territory of other natives, and then they start warring with other fellow natives for the limited resources that was exasperated by the white settlements. So it's a very fair look at the frontier. That's why the title, I feel, is so appropriate. An American Saga. It's not about, when you say American, it isn't just about whitey. It's about the entire, nation itself, the forming of a nation.
And the thing is kind of like, it takes it further than that. It basically makes it, about like the whole concept of manifest destiny. Automatically people shun it and say, no, this is terrible, da 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 da. But they never really tackled the really meaning and grasp of what it means about manifest destiny. The idea that basically, in order to succeed, in order to survive, in order to attain this dream, this horizon, you have to essentially understand that you're going to be stepping on other people to get there. Because there's other people that are trying to attain that horizon. There are other people that are trying to live that horizon. And if you want to attain this horizon, if you want to attain this quote unquote American dream, you're going to have to contend with a bunch of other people that are trying to actually attain the American dream.
And the movie sets the tone at the very beginning when I believe the missionary quotes the scripture about brother turning against brother
Dude,
in
I
order to
loved it.
fight for the scarce resources of the land. They set the tone for you what this film is going to be about.
Yeah, and that's the amazing thing to me is like when I look at Horizon in the realm of studying the filmmaking aspects and the story making aspects, Kevin Costner did an amazing job of basically doing the job properly in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Because like he explains his entire point of his story within 10 minutes. And then his first 30 minutes of the act, which I have to say is like one of my favorite scenes ever produced visually, with the massacre of the settlement of Horizon, the first 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Is so engrossing that it should be studied by a lot of film classes today, because people should be pointing to it saying, this is how you set the tone in your film.
Yeah.
But the problem with that, Mike, and I thought about this, is like we live in a time where filmmakers are constantly trying to do something different. I've always heard people say, well, I want to do a unique take. I want to do this. I want to do something experimental. Hey, I love experimental filmmaking. I think that that's the best way to learn. But there's also a point when there's rules set that basically have been given to us in years of filmmaking that we all still follow, because those are what we build our skills on. You look at the first 30 minutes of Horizon, and I'm like going, he sets his tone, gives his theme within 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And it's so easily done, because I'm like going,
It's the perfect inciting incident. But I do believe, David, that this might be Costner's best directing he's done. He's done a handful of films. He's more of an actor than a director.
yeah.
But just the use of Horizon alone, which seems to be our main focus for the second half of our discussion so far, the name Horizon was probably the best title for this film, because Horizon is used in everything. The film's sweeping landscapes and epic scope, it underscores the mythic proportions of the story. So its formal elements also support these ideas. So, like, for example, through cinematography, the continual framing of the horizon evokes a range of connotations, both positive and negative. You have opportunity and possibility, hope and optimism, expansion and progress, but you also have uncertainty and danger, isolation and disconnection, and then, of course, endlessness and futility. There's also a flyer that promotes, we've talked about this briefly a few moments ago, that promotes the frontier town that is almost treated like an extension of Manifest Destiny's,
Manifest Destiny,
this alleged divine providence. It's revered at times. Others, it offers hope. It spurs on the pioneer spirit. So in many ways, this flyer symbolizes the unflinching dream of Western expansion, and more contemporarily, the American dream. So the idea is rooted in the concept of divine providence, where westward expansion was seen as a mission ordained by God. And so it also entices settlers with promises of prosperity and safety in the town of Horizon.
Mm-hmm.
So this flyer, in all actuality, embodies the ideal of boundless opportunity and the allure of a new beginning.
Mm-hmm.
But Costner's deft understanding of the Western genre and its many forms also uses notions of modernity and its encroaching, threatening arrival. So you have another theme going on about modernity and what it meant for the closing of these open spaces. And there is an anxiety that's associated with the closing of the frontier. Many film theorists pertaining to the Western genre itself has talked about this in great detail. On one hand, you have the origins of this westward expansion that rises in parallel with the anxieties associated with the closing of the West. This tension is illustrated through Rooker's character, which was brilliant. Michael Rooker's my favorite role he's had since Replacement Killers. Yeah, that's right. I bet you people thought I was going to say Guardians of the Galaxy.
No. Replacement killers.
Yeah, come on. This character, Rooker's character, he laments the closing of the once open spaces, and this reflects the broader historical and cultural impact of modernity, which reshaped the American landscape and altered the ideals associated with westward expansion.
Yeah, and that's the. I thought that was like one of my favorite moments is Michael Rooker's character in the very beginning,
good, dude.
And it was kind of like.
Well, you say the very beginning, but I mean, the movie was so long; it was actually like an hour into the film.
It was an hour into the film, and it was like almost the beautiful thing about Michael Rooker's character. I at first thought, I thought Kevin Costner was going to be the main character, but it really felt like Michael Rooker's character was the main character.
Dude, yeah, man. There's a lot of Sam Worthington.
Yes.
I had no idea was going to play such a prominent role. Sienna Miller, prominent role. Michael Rooker, prominent role. And, dude, I'm so glad he isn't playing a piece of shit because that seems to be where he always gets cast. Here, we want you to play a bad guy.
Yeah.
And though he played an interesting villain in Guardians, he's always given those roles.
Yeah.
But he's such a good actor. You got to give him something else. So I was very pleased that they gave him a role that he can actually sink his teeth in to and not just play the default baddie.
And that's the thing that I started noticing as I was watching Horizon was like, Horizon storytelling isn't about a centralized character. And that's when it started really hitting me is because like all those characters that they were starting to introduce, they all tie into the actual character of the story, which is that theme, that concept.
It's always about the characters are the themes of the series.
Yeah, and that might sound confusing to some people, but it's like no, that is how storytelling should be.
And all those themes are connected to Horizon. So in a lot of ways, Horizon and its associated themes, and when I say Horizon, I'm talking about the role the title takes in the form of the city. The town being built, and its associated themes, those are the characters of the story.
Yes. And those are the characters because like the important thing about that is like all of them are tied by that concept down to, even like just like what you alluded to earlier, even like the Native American characters.
Yes.
They tie into that centralized concept so that in a very unique way, this story, there is no main character because that's the thing that everyone is talking about is like, well, who's the main protagonist, main antagonist? And that's a very superficial way of thinking about that. There has to be one versus one.
Well, like I said at the beginning of our show, David, I had said that this is written as an episodic film narrative.
Yeah.
So there are various characters. You can point to one storyline in particular that's you can say is the more traditional Western storyline, and it's the storyline pertaining specifically to Kevin Costner. That's the more traditional storyline. But I'm sure moving into part 2, his story is going to probably be more closely aligned with Horizon. Because right now, he is the disconnect from the town itself, but he is associated with the themes that are connected to the town.
Because in a lot of ways, Kevin Costner's character is working towards Horizon.
There, look at you, David. Exactly right. Exactly right.
Everyone's there at Horizon. They're there. Like the very first characters we see, they're just at that cusp or right there at Horizon. Kevin Costner's character is working towards Horizon.
Yeah. In more than one way. There's a lot we haven't learned about his character because he does come off a little, I don't want to say existential. He does come off sad. And I don't know if that's just Costner being Costner or there's something there, but I do feel like we've barely scraped the surface of his character.
I do. I gotta get that sense too. I kind of, in a weird sort of way, I looked at Kevin Costner's character as not as sad, but stoic.
There you go. Yeah, it's probably better.
He's more of a stoic character,
but there's something there. Like I feel like there's a
something
bigger
deeper.
story there,
Yeah.
that we haven't touched on yet.
And I think that's why Kevin Costner was drawing this out into a multi-part saga, was because, in essence, he wants to show character growth. And he wants to show that basically his character is going to earn this goal overall in the story narrative.
Or he may not even earn it, because oftentimes in Westerns, the classic Western hero is not allowed to live in the future city.
Yeah.
Like, they pave the way and make it possible for the future, but the one that makes it possible is usually the one that cannot enter the promised land.
Yes.
Which if Costner is doing everything so perfect right now with the first part, I have to think that's how the saga is going to end. It's going to end with him not being able to have access
to Horizon. Yes.
He will either be killed or he'll be forced to ride off.
Yeah. And in the end, though, the cap of his story could and should, in my opinion, lead to he's not the one that gets to Horizon. It's the next generation, his ancestry.
Yes.
Earns the right to be in Horizon.
Right.
Because of the work that he paved.
Mm-hmm.
That is basically kind of like what I kind of get about the themes and the concepts of Horizon is like, everyone is trying to march into this manifest destiny, but there comes a cost. And like some people are working more than just for themselves.
A good example of this would be the spaghetti Western directed by Sergio Leone, Once Upon a Time in the West, where you have the end of the film, you have the beginnings of civilization, you have the female character wearing white who represents the civilization, Eastern feminine values, that then tends to the garden, which is the settlement.
Yes.
You have the same thing being set up here. You have the two actresses, Sienna Miller and her daughter. I forget the name of the actress. Abby Lee, I believe is her name. Nope, that's the other one. Georgia McPhail. So you have Elizabeth Kittredge and Frances Kittredge, who are dressed in white for the entire 3 hours of the film.
3 hours of the film.
They also represent civilization. They're idolized in the film. Some people were pointing to how weird that was. And it's because Kevin Costner is literally using Western film theory to shape his narrative.
Mm-hmm.
These two women, or I should say the mother and the daughter, represent the future. They are going to be at the center of Horizon eventually. And they will be the faces of this settlement. So there's a lot going on. And these are things that take time to get to. That's why I feel like him making this a potential four-act saga, let's just call it that, I can see why he's trying to do that now. He wants things to marinate. He's trying to tell a true Western saga about the origins and the settlement of the American frontier. And because of that, there is a reflexivity to what he's doing. And that brings us to the more revisionist aspects of the Western or Horizon. Now, we've talked a lot during the first half about the more traditional film theories, because this film takes, as I had said at the top of the show, it's using the vast array of theories. It's taking portions from traditional Westerns and, of course, the revisionist Westerns of the 60s and 70s. And the film incorporates the self-reflexivity of revisionist Westerns. You know, by blending the classic and revisionist elements, Costner now challenges the simplistic moral binaries that are often found in earlier Westerns. And his characters are not merely heroes and villains, but complex individuals shaped by the harsh realities of frontier life. This is the revisionist element. This nuanced portrayal aligns with the postmodern trend in Westerns, where the genre's conventions are questioned and subverted, offering a more critical view of American history and identity, which it does. As the film explores the closing of the frontier, it also reflects on how modernity reshapes the mythic landscape of the West, ultimately contrasting the idealized past with the complexities of the present. So this film is operating at all levels here.
Yeah, it's basically going at all cylinders, and it's amazing to me because the amount of work and the amount of
research
that you have to do. In a lot of ways, I look at what Kevin Costner is setting out to do, and I see similarities to say like what Leone did with his trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, where his entire trilogy. Me and you have gone in detail about each movie.
The Dollars trilogy,
not just the Dollars trilogy, but the
the Once Upon a Time
Once
trilogy.
Upon a Time trilogy.
Yeah,
and he basically wanted to show history, the history of this, what he saw as the history of the Americans, right? Based on the ideas and the perspective from an Italian filmmaker. I kind of see similarities what Costner is starting to do with Horizon, because like in the very beginning, I was very skeptical when he made the announcement, oh, I'm going to do a 4-parter saga. And I remember me and you talking about it, going, that's a lot to actually
ask the audience
to actually to do. But then when you think about it, if Costner is looking at this as a filmmaker to actually say something,
right?
You know, and I give him props because, you know, I have my own opinions about today's filmmaking. Not a lot of people are willing to say something. They just want to echo what the echo chamber is saying.
Or they say the echo
redundancy.
Chamber, yes.
They want to be redundant.
Yeah.
And don't say something different. Or say something that is legitimate.
That may not be
authentic.
Yeah, there you go. Or may not be aligned with contemporary mainstream thought on certain things. And you can definitely argue that the Western, in its more traditional form, even in some of its revisionist form, don't really sync with contemporary ideas on certain things.
No. And, you know, that's another talk for another day about how the audience looks at Westerns. But in regards to Costner's looking at this as a true film-making point.
He approached this as a
milestone.
As an auteur director.
Yes, an auteur director. That's the thing I was trying to think of.
Which David... I mean, I have to wait till I see the other films, but no, not for this movie. You don't.
No,
I would say this is his best directing that he's done, and I'm going to go through his list of films he's directed. It's not that many.
But
Dances with Wolves, which I know everyone wants to love that movie. I do not feel like that's his best work.
I think it was a good opening act.
Yeah, it's definitely a good movie. It's not a bad movie. I just don't think it's his best work. Then you have The Postman in 1997. Not that great. I could appreciate it for what it was, but I understand why audiences didn't vibe with it. And then you have 2003's Open Range, which up to Horizon was probably his best film.
Yeah.
So now we have Horizon. So he's only directed 4 films. He's not someone I would call a director. I would call him an actor, and he directs occasionally.
Yeah.
So over the course of his entire career, he's directed roughly 4 films, give or take. He's produced a lot of other films, but mostly as a director, or I should say as a director, 4 films. And I feel like this is an example of it makes me feel a little annoyed. I get a little annoyed because if he's able to direct a movie like this, I almost feel like he should have been directing most of his career.
Well, if you think about,
because he would have been. Imagine if he would have exercised that muscle for the last 20 years.
Well, look at
how good he could have been.
Look at the movies that he did decide to direct, though, and it's almost kind of like, in a lot of ways, it looks like he chose these specific things to match what he feels his style is. You have Dances with Wolves, then you jump to The Postman, which, you know, yeah, they're 2 different films, but in a lot of ways,
it's very much a Western still.
Yeah. And then you go to, what was the third one that we brought up?
Open Range. Amazing.
Open Range, which is, I think, his best. That by far is like one of my favorite Westerns of all time, just because there's so many things that I love about that film. And then you get to Horizon, where all 4 films, you see like this chosen trajectory that I think I'm hate to sound like I know what Kevin Costner's thinking, but you can kind of glean at the fact that basically this is what he's choosing because he knows his style. He knows what genre that he's strong in, and he knows what type of storytelling he can do.
Mm-hmm.
Even when you think about like outside of directing, the really successful and critical projects that he has worked on that we all know that he's very passionate about. Yellowstone is kind of the same vein as a lot of the type of storytelling that we see him excel at as a director. I think that's why a lot of people were expecting Yellowstone out of Horizon, which understandable, but also I think that basically you're negating the fact what Costner is still by far. He is a filmmaker. He wants to say something.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to copy his past projects, or he doesn't want to be redundant. If he said something in Yellowstone, it's going to be stuck in Yellowstone. And like he's not going to take that over to Horizon. He's going to want to say something different.
Yeah.
And that's what I think is like, that's why now when I look at it, why we laughed at the fact that he wanted to make a 4 epic saga. No, I think that he's seeing Horizon as kind of like, this is going to be his masterpiece.
Yeah.
His ultimate thesis.
I agree.
His
No, I
ultimate
agree.
thesis as a filmmaker.
That makes perfect sense, especially because no matter how sad, despite the fact that this sounds kind of sad, he's at the end of his career. And he's probably approaching the end of his life. That's the sad reality of it.
It is a sad reality.
It is a sad reality, but it's also
He's not a young man.
It's also factual.
Yeah.
And he probably realizes this, especially if you listen to his interviews leading up to the release of Horizon. He sounds like a man who's reminiscing, who's thinking of the past, who's also thinking that, or who is also very aware that he doesn't have a lot of time in front of him anymore. He has far less years in front of him than there are behind him. And in a lot of ways, he probably is looking at this as, you know what, this is how I want to be remembered. I want to go out of this world on my own terms.
On my own terms.
And I'm going to make 4 major films that I've been wanting to do for decades. And I'm using my money, so I don't really care what contemporary demographics and contemporary studios are saying will or will not work. He probably was well aware this movie probably wouldn't resonate with the mainstream. In fact, there was numerous interviews where he said things pretty similar to that. Like, you know, he doesn't expect this to be a box office hit.
Yeah.
You know, so this is a guy who was very aware that he's at the end of his career and wants to go out on his own terms with his own signature and to be remembered by something like this, an epic Western. And I believe anyone who understands Western films, let's forget audiences for a second. Let's just look at film geeks, film enthusiasts, film scholars, academics. I would find it really hard for them to watch this movie and not think it's pretty damn good.
Oh, yeah. Because, like, at the end of the day, when you think about it, especially for film enthusiasts,
Yeah.
a project like this and a film like this is absolute joy for, like, film enthusiasts because there's something behind it. There's an artist actually wanting to say something.
It's a hearkening back to, I know we were saying it isn't a hearkening back, but it's a hearkening back to old school film production.
Yes.
Just making a damn good film. And that's your purpose right there.
Oh, yeah. And, like, when you think about it, I know we don't want to sound overly critical of today's filmmaking and the substance that a lot of people criticize it about, how everything's superficial.
Less? You mean
substance less?
Substance less?
It's basically, you know, like more superficial than basically wanting to legitimately say, do a piece of legitimate art.
Right.
And here comes Horizon, who basically is captained by a filmmaker who harkens back to that, hey, this is still, film is still art. That is what Kevin Costner to me is saying with Horizon. And in doing so, he's like spitting in the eye of basically those big conglomerates that basically feel that, hey, what matters most is box office and bottom line. And that is such a powerful statement just outside of the film to make as a filmmaker that I'm like going, more enthusiasts should be championing this freaking film. You know, we should be championing the fact that here's someone that basically is wanting to do something different.
That's why, David, when we were talking about running time for this discussion, I said, let's just go with whatever feels natural. Why, if we're talking about a good movie, why hold ourselves to
back?
the 55, 60-minute running time? Let's get into it. But that does now lead us to the cons. Now, I know people have listened for the last 90 minutes about us pretty much blowing the movie because it's definitely a good film. But that doesn't mean that
It's perfect.
Yeah, don't see the flaws of the film as well. The final quarter of the film feels a bit wonky.
Yes.
What I would call Costnerisms, things that are common in films that he's a part of. Not bad, but they very well could have to do with the fact that this is designed as a multi-part saga.
Yeah.
There's me trying to justify some of those inconsistencies because the film is pretty solid for the opening 2 hours, maybe 2.5 hours. And then during that last hour, I don't want to say it falls apart because it doesn't. That would be unfair. There are things that make you scratch your head that are a little hard to follow. And I think that might have been a mistake from Costner's when it comes to Costner's decision with that final quarter.
I thought about this. I've thought about this since me and you have also talked about this off air. One of the biggest cons is that the last part of the film feels like it's just a freaking trailer for Horizon Part 2.
And we're not talking about the actual trailer they actually put at the end of the movie. We're talking about the aspects leading up to that.
Aspects leading up to it. I mean, the last, I would say 45, 50 minutes to me just felt like, okay, you're deviating away from the story to set up the next chapter. And it's a very, me and you have discussed about this, how it feels like it's a very TV trope thing to do.
Yeah.
Like you get to the season finale and then you get like this to be continued type of element.
It feels like the problems that I had, for example, with Hatfield and McCoy.
Yeah.
The problems I have with the last, say, 35, 40 minutes or so has a lot to do with the issues I had with Hatfields and McCoys. It's just a lot of time jumps without the visual cues and explanations behind the time advancing the way it did.
Mm-hmm. And like the problem that I have with it, I started actually thinking about it more and saying, okay, do I agree it's a con? Currently, yes. But now I'm trying to think is like, well, why is it a con? Because essentially he's trying to actually make sure that he sets up for the next chapter.
Yeah.
And I basically tell people how much of that, and I'm trying not to be an apologist for that con because
this is just your thoughts. It's fine.
Yeah. The more I thought about it, I'm like going, how is it that basically it's a con if at the end of the day, what else could he possibly have done? You know what I mean?
Ended the movie at 2.5 hours.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's kind of like if he really wanted to cut it,
yeah,
he would have to have ended it. I was trying to debate to myself, where would he end it?
He could have ended it about 2.5 hours in. I understand why he didn't. Now, going again, not trying to be apologist.
Yeah.
Not trying to be an apologist, David, either. But I would agree that if you look at this as not an individual film, I know that's typically how I don't tell people to look at films. Look at it for what it is and what it's giving us. But in a lot of ways, this kind of breaks that rule because this is designed not as a standalone film. This is designed as an ongoing 4-part saga. It wasn't a successful movie, and then the studio's all, let's make a part 2. This was conceived as a 4-part series or saga. So those aspects of him setting up for the next movie seem like logical things to do. But because we as Western audiences have a very specific way, or at least we have a very specific idea of how films are supposed to be made, When things are done differently than we expect, we tend to say, "Oh, that's bad."
Exactly.
But I watched this movie 3 times now, and when I watched that ending, yes, I still stand by that it could have been handled differently, but I do have a very different perspective on it than I did when I first watched the film. I can now see that these are aspects that are vital to the introduction of his second film.
Yeah, and that's the thing also that I came to realize is, does the last 45 minutes truly hurt the film?
Oh, I see. I don't think it hurts the movie.
Exactly. And that's why I'm like going, okay, so if it doesn't truly hurt the film, is it a con then?
In terms of form, it's just less than stellar.
Mm-hmm.
But
because
I don't
it goes
feel
against it goes against like those things that you were alluding to, where it's like it goes against what we have been taught.
Right.
And I'm like going, okay, so essentially what you're saying, what people are saying is like Costner went in, knew the rule, and he bent the rule.
If this is someone like there you go, exactly. If this was someone like Brett Ratner, I would be like, the ending sucks because you suck. But the rest of the movie is proof that Kevin Costner knows how to make a film. So when I see the last quarter of the film, I don't think, wow, this is straight garbage.
Yeah.
I think, well, obviously he is done intentionally because the man obviously knows how to make a film.
Yes.
So if he chose to do it, now that doesn't make it better. But if he intentionally did this, then at least it was intentional and wasn't a mistake because he is a shitty director.
Yes. And that's what I came also down to is like, how much is this intentional and how much does this feel accidental? At the end of the day, after I watched the ending for the umpteenth time it felt, I'm like going, no, this is intentional.
Mm-hmm.
This truly is intentional. It's not like, at first I was like, thinking, oh, it feels like a rush job, right? Mm-hmm. Because like we're to be continued, and he goes into the last 45 minutes to establish new characters, and he blazes right through it. And I'm like going, well, wait a minute, no. If that was the case, then Costner you would say that basically Costner did this by accident. Like he got to that point and said, oh my God, I got to actually finish my film.
Yeah.
And when you think about it, no. We know Costner has planned that basically, no, there's going to be Horizon Part 2, Horizon Part 3, Horizon Part 4. So he's not going to feel rushed.
Yeah.
He's going to get to that ending regardless. So it's a very, to me, that is one of the things that's a very interesting argument is like, do we hold filmmakers accountable when they bend the rules or when they break them?
Yeah. Well, if you break the rules and you know how to make a movie, then it's okay to break the rules. Like we always say, if you know the rules, you can break them.
It's those rules of writing.
Yeah. So we're running out of time.
And we could keep on going.
So I don't want to drag this out past 2 hours. So I won't be able to get into all the ins and outs of the visual effects. But just so people are aware, this film is a beautiful example of how you do seamless visual effects. And the reason why I want to bring this up, David, is because we are in a time where visual effects, which is a little strange because technology has gotten to a point where you can do so many things. But for some reason, we have reverted back to a time when visual effects didn't look good. And they're in your face. There's a lot of distortions. They use a lot of light blooms and lens flare to hide the effects, as if they don't have $1 million+ to do a specific visual effects scene. They choose to hide it, which, if I was a visual effects artist, would feel a little upset. Like, so I spent the last 6 months of my life working on this sequence, and you're going to hide it and cover it up with lens flare and stupid light blooms. That's the era we're in. But then you watch a movie like this, where I believe there was over 256 visual effects shots, including CG environments and set extensions, digi-doubles, CGI horses and insects, and FX elements, including smoke, mist, fire, and blood. And, David, the river that is continually seen throughout the film is 100% CGI.
CGI. And you would never have guessed it.
Beautiful, seamless work. These are the types of visual effects artists that should be recognized for their work because it is mind-blowingly well done.
Yeah.
The next bit is the score by John Debney. Classic American Western soundtrack. I enjoyed it. I've actually purchased the soundtrack since seeing the film and have listened to it 3 or 4 times on repeat while I'm exercising and reading. It's a fantastic Western soundtrack. David, this brings me to my final thoughts. I'm giving this film an 89%. It would be a 96, a 97 if it wasn't for that last quarter. But it's an 89%. It is a solid Western film. But that does not mean that only Western fans or aficionados would enjoy this. I believe anyone who likes mature films, serious films, would in fact like this movie. David?
I 100% agree with you. And my score is pretty much on the same of yours. The more I talk about it, the more I'm like questioning even my score from the get-go is an 89. I gave it 89 just because the last 40 minutes do seem like it's not something that normally we would see in a film. We would see it in a TV production, but not a film. But the more I talk about it, just as probably people have been noticing when we discussed it, I'm beginning to soften on it because I'm like going, well, we know that was intentional. It's not accidental. If it was accidental, yeah, you would dock scores for it. But now I find myself saying, well, no, this was intentional by the filmmaker to say, I want people to come back and actually watch my masterpiece that I'm working on. And I found myself all of a sudden like really at a quandary saying, well, do I dock an artist for doing that because he just decided to bend the rule? Then I wouldn't say he broke the rule, he bent it.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. The visual effects just shocked me because I could have sworn that the first time I ever saw Horizon, I'm like, oh, everything's so practical. And then when I read the article about how like, oh yeah, that river that is like a major fixture in the show is actually all CGI, I was just blown away. I'm like, going, how the hell did you fool people? Because no one talks about it. You'd realize no one talks about the visual effects of Horizon.
Dude, and the fact that this movie is cost $50 million and you have a 3-hour epic with amazing visuals, good acting, CGI that is just mind-blowingly great.
Dare I say,
it goes to show you that there is so much waste in Hollywood.
Yeah, dare I say, you know, like in other shows that have been covered in the network, I have hearkened at films, specifically like Godzilla minus one.
Yep.
Where the visual effects beat other movies that are like 200 million, 300 million.
Yeah.
Here comes films that basically like a Godzilla minus one, like Horizons in there.
Well, dude, we should throw this on our list of economic films that are mind-blowingly awesome, and yet they are mere fractions of the typical Marvel or DC budget.
Yeah.
So you have Godzilla, which was what, $19-20 million.
Yes.
Beautiful film. Then you have The Creator, directed by Gareth Edwards, that was made for $80 million. And yet, if someone were to throw this movie in front of me and tell me to watch it and estimate the budget, I would say it's got to be $300 million.
Yeah.
Easily. Now we have Horizons with a $50 million budget.
Yeah. And think about it. Everyone's making a big deal. Oh, it had a small box office. I'm like going, oh, you guys don't understand. I don't think Costner cares about how much he makes.
And also, it's not as much of a flop as people are saying because the budget is so low.
Yeah.
I believe it's made $40 million now. So 6 months from now, after it's benefited from the numerous
streaming
distribution windows, it's going to be just fine.
It'll be fine for him.
Technically, you should make 3 times your budget. So, you probably should make 150. But in the grand scheme of things, a film like this is going to stand the test of time.
Yeah.
So it will continually make money.
I will say this right now. I will be very arguably not arguably, I will be very disappointed if Oscars come around.
Oh, come on, be prepared.
And Horizon's not named one of the, at least in one of the categories. Specifically, I think like the visual effects.
It's not, David. It's not.
And I will be very disappointed. I will be looking at the Academy Awards going, are you goddamn kidding me?
Dude, it's a white man. I'm sorry, I don't want to be political, but this movie goes against what Hollywood is currently about. It really is. And even though it shouldn't, because it's a very objective look at the taming of the West or the settlement of the West, but it's not going to be viewed by knee-jerk critics who watch the opening 30 minutes and like, oh my God, Indians are bad. They're the bad guys in this movie.
They're bad.
Haven't you guys learned anything over the last 60 years?
They're simple savages.
Oh, potty mouth. All right. So what was your score though?
89.
89. So both 89% across the board. All right. What an awesome movie to talk about. It's probably my favorite movie of the year.
One of mine, yeah, absolutely.
I just can't say enough about it to go check it out, that I can that I can bother my mother, my father, my brothers, my cousins, my friends, but go see the movie. You'll like it.
Yeah.
So, all right, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, David.
Thank you.